we have a very good program for this afternoon, timely, informational, and hopefully it will be sufficient to whet your appetite in order to make you go to the next public meeting where this program will be fully discussed in great detail, and you'll be able to ask all kinds of questions. I don't know whether they'll be able to answer them or not, but you'll be able to ask. I have with us today to do the program Mr. Eric Cockley, who is the Director of Planning for the Frankfort, or the City Planning and Zoning program there in Frankfort. And Eric is one of the staff persons who is directing the contractors who are writing the comprehensive plan for Frankfort and Franklin County. And I'll let him give you all of the details about how many people are on the committees and et cetera, and what it is that you as a citizen are supposed to glean from the conversation and be able to interpret the things that show up on the paper or technology now, where you can go and look at the comprehensive plan and what is visualized for Frankfurt over the next 5 years or 10 years or whatever the case may be. And without further ado, I want to introduce Mr. Cockley.
Thanks for having me. I'll kind of start at the 30,000 foot view and just kind of talk about what the comp plan is and the general process, and then you guys can ask me whatever specific questions you may have. For those of you that may not be aware, the comp plan is a statutorily required planning document. Probably the most important, if not the most important, the part that you hear about the most is the future land use portion, but we're required to do this every 5 years to look at our comp plan and either choose to re-adopt it or revise it or rewrite it entirely. So this time we're rewriting it entirely. And essentially, the enabling statutes for us to have planning and zoning rules and regulations says in order to have those things, the community has to keep up with this comprehensive plan, which is essentially the future vision for what the community wants to be. We're required to have certain elements. We're required to have a community facilities element, a land use element, transportation and infrastructure element. And I'm feeling like I'm forgetting one. But you can add any other additional elements you want, but we statutorily have to have those particular elements. Oh, and the goals and policies. So we have formed an advisory committee and steering committee. The steering committee is largely is elected officials and some appointed planning commissioners that help staff sort of negotiate the process to make sure we think, our public engagement and the process in general for considering changes and public input is appropriate as we go through it. And the advisory group is a number of representatives from community organizations as well as some folks at large from the community that help serve on this advisory group, and that they're kind of the sounding board for the content of the plan itself. So as we get public input and then the consultant team and staff works to begin drafting chapters, we take that to the advisory committee then and get input from them whether they think that's a representative product about what we've heard. So we've been diligently working on this process for a little over 2 years now. It's been a lengthy endeavor, but we're coming towards the end. The advisory committee has been in the process of revising draft chapters as the consultant team has produced them. We're down to the last couple of chapters to look at before we'll have an entire document to put together. We're very excited finally. KRS actually requires us, so the Planning Commission will approve the full comprehensive plan ultimately, and then we'll take that to each legislative body. But KRS also requires for you to do that goals and policies chapter of the comp plan, which has to have its own public hearing. So you may have seen in the news, the last Planning Commission meeting, well, 2 Planning Commission meetings ago, we had a public hearing, continued it last month, and so the Planning Commission has approved the draft goals and policies. So we'll be forwarding those to legislative bodies now and continuing work on the draft chapters. The advisory committee meets next on May 1st. Those meetings are not public engagement opportunities, so to speak, but they are public meetings, so anybody is welcome to attend if they're interested. We regularly have a few people in the room that aren't on the committee that just choose to come because they're interested, and we let them participate. But as I said, it's not really a public engagement opportunity. Likely the next public engagement opportunity will be when we begin sharing the full draft plan with the public and putting those individual chapters on the website to get some immediate response before taking it to the Planning Commission. Our goal is to have this process wrapped up June, July if we can, which is a bit optimistic with where we are now, but that's still what we're trying to hold ourselves to. The only thing I would add about how this plan is used, in addition to, as I talked about, we talk about community facilities, which could be anything from needs of public services to utilities, to perhaps needs for our park system or school system going forward. But one of the things that you most will see the comp plan be referenced from and used for is when people file zone change applications with the Planning Commission. And that's why probably one of the things that people get most tied to with the comp plan, and it makes sense because it's really important when we do our future land use map, that is one of the things that we review in terms of whether a zone map amendment is appropriate or not. So KRS says that when the Planning Commission hears a zone change request and forwards that on to the legislative body, the criteria that they're supposed to use is it in conformance with the comprehensive plan? And the biggest, most direct question when we're reviewing those things is, does the proposed zoning match the proposed future land use designation? So that gets, as you would imagine, as we've gone through this with the advisory group and the public, the most interest and probably the most input and debate is about what's supposed to be on that map, because that will have a huge effect on what down the road 5-10 years some property owner can apply for a zone change and whether they're going to have success with that or not. But that's where we are. I'm happy to take questions. Any more about the process as we're going through or the document itself?
Eric, are you prepared to talk in detail about, I have a copy of the existing land use plan, the map, and the future plan. Can you touch on where the basic changes are?
Yeah, so we have very different land use categories from the existing comp plan. A lot of the areas, there aren't huge changes. You'll notice that on the existing future land use map, from the draft future land use map, there's probably a lot more of what we call rural farms natural landscape rather than residential out in the rural areas of the county. The biggest area of debate is probably not surprising to you all, is in and around the Farmdale Sanitation District and whether to have commercial industrial development shown on the future land use map in that area. So we've shown future residential development in the area as sanitary sewers become available. There's been a lot of debate. I think it was published in the paper that there may be an application and some funds attempting to come from the governor for a proposed industrial park in southern Franklin County. That is probably the single biggest debate that the advisory group and the public seems to have had. In our current draft future land use map, we are not showing that classified as industrial because most of the public input we received was not supportive of the idea. We'll see what happens when we get to Planning Commission and to the Fiscal Court and City Commission. One of the biggest areas that shows potential growth within the city and then the suburban area of the county, if you look at our current proposed future land use map, is the Leestown Road corridor, which is not surprising. You've seen a lot of current zone changes just here in the last couple of years in the area. There's available sanitary sewer in the corridor. It's a 4-lane highway. So that probably is one of the sort of growth centers, if you will. Within the city, the remaining large tract we have for development are the Parsons Farm and Knowles Farm. They're behind Franklin Square. And so we're showing on the future land use map as appropriate a mixture of potential land uses and developments in that area. I'm trying to think if there's any other widely changed.
What about the corridor, but 127 and I-64 on the west side?
So above I-64, it's, once again, we have different land use categories, but in terms of that commercial corridor, we still show that with what what we're using this time. In the last plan, we had both regional retail and suburban business center as two of our like big commercial designations. We've gone with much more of a mixed use concept in this comp plan. So we have a regional mixed use and a neighborhood mixed use. And the regional mixed use we've applied to like the 127 corridor, particularly near I-64, because they're those larger commercial districts that serve more of a region potentially with your big box retailers and other stuff. But we also want to encourage, the mixture of multifamily uses potentially and other things. And as you go into town, if you look at our map, you'll see it begins to change to neighborhood mixed use as the corridor gets smaller, which still encourage a large mixture of uses and a lot of non-commercial uses, but largely the scale and scope begins to change because we're thinking about businesses and the scale of businesses that is likely to serve more of the surrounding neighborhood than a region. And I would encourage you to go to distilledtogether.com. That is our project website, and there is a draft version of the future land use map available. You can type in your address and it'll pull it up and you can see what we marked your property as, or just peruse the map in general to see what those categories are and what we have those in the current draft map.
What's the email address?
Distilledtogether.com.
What? Steel?
Distilled. Yeah. I'm fairly certain if you Google Franklin County Comp Plan Rewrite 2023, it'll be one of the choices.
Oh, okay.
Thanks
Sure.
for being your question. You said you're with your city, correct?
Yes.
But you referenced rural. So is there a cooperative? Do you all work as a
Absolutely.
combined unit with planning and zoning?
Yeah, so one of the unique things about how Frankfort and Franklin County does things, which I'm sure you'll be shocked, we're unique, is that we have a joint planning commission, but we have separate city and county planning staff, separate city and county planning regulations, and what have you. So the comprehensive plan is a joint land use document between the city and the county. The chief client in this case of the consultant is the Frankfort Franklin County Planning Commission. So we serve as staff to that. So the city and county staff have worked together with the consultant team and the advisory groups on this because we're producing one document for the entire community to use. And what's exciting about what we're doing now is that once we get done with the comp plan, we have already got the same consultant team under contract to then work on new development regs for the city and the county, which have not been rewritten in decades. I'm actually a bit more excited about that part than I am the comp plan, to be honest, because we have places, I think everywhere, but certainly since my tenure began at the city that I've seen where we have a lot of our underinvested older neighborhoods. And one of the reasons, among others, that I think that's happened is because our zoning has really not been an appropriate tool for those. But our intention with the development code, is, at least between city staff and county staff, has been that we want to redevelop a single development code for the entire county that'll just be kind of divided geographically, but so that everybody knows there's one playbook.
So is there, speaking of one, is there a single solitary place to go and look at a particular tract, maybe by the parcel number that you can see zoning? PVA seems to not have a lot of...
PVA doesn't. Both the city and county have their own live web maps. I think if you go to the county's website and scroll all the way to the bottom of the main page, I think there's a link. On ours, I believe if you go to frankfort.ky.gov, and I'm trying to think what you hover over one of the I think there's a subtitle of like live, and hover over it and click on it. You can go and there's a page that says city web maps, and there's a series of maps, one of which has zoning among other things.
Address or parcel number, okay.
Yeah, I think you can search by both, but definitely address.
Hopefully parcel, because not everything has an address.
Right.
So, thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
And my question is general, since I have some ownership in what's going on. When we began the process of redeveloping the comprehensive plan, Franklin County, well, Frankfort and Franklin County, because it was across pollination of people who were doing it, were discussing pretty heavily how the county would be able to accommodate the bourbon industry.
Mm-hmm.
Does the comprehensive plan, as it is currently drafted, will it contain some direction with regard to how the county should approach that issue in terms of its planning and zoning?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if you check out the draft land use chapter, there's an entire section that is only dedicated to the bourbon question, because it's a unique industry. As we all well know, I know you know, that we've wrestled with in this community. So there's language there that starts to direct us how to consider doing that when we get to the development code. We kept it out of, we intentionally, you'll notice if you read in the descriptions of the industrial future land use designations, and we talk about potential uses in those, you'll notice that it's conspicuously absent from being specifically noted. And part of the reason is, and we say this in the section dedicated to it, is that, a bourbon distillery isn't a bourbon distillery isn't a bourbon distillery. We have Jim Beam's facility, Buffalo Trace's facility, which we hear a lot about, but then we also have Whiskey Thief. And I think we could all agree that there are places that a Whiskey Thief, scale of a distillery is appropriate that a Buffalo Trace or a Jim Beam might entirely not be. And then that question gets even more blurry if you think about, well, okay, but we're just going to build warehouses. Well, okay, if you're Buffalo Trace, that's a huge scale, but once they're built, very low intensity, so it's its own question. So the short version is, we kind of touch on all these topics in that land use draft chapter when we talk about bourbon, and how that we need to look at this and develop some standards depending on exactly what that animal is that we're dealing with, to then decide which zoning districts they're appropriate in. So the comp plan doesn't out and out say this is how you should do it, but we just point out the questions that we need to be addressed, and the fact that it's a unique industry that's obviously significant to our local economy and character and sense of place, and that, as I said, there's very different versions of that industry scope, scale, and the fact that even the larger, bourbon distilleries, as I think most of us know from living in this area, unlike a lot of other industries, would actually prefer many times to be in a rural area because of the tourism components and all those other things that most of your, industrial manufacturing don't do. So it'll be an interesting one to continue wrestling with when we get to the development code, for sure.
Okay, and I'm satisfied with your comments there. Another thing that has been in the news recently is that the KCDC group that is supposedly looking at development in Frankfort and Franklin County, so that the county can grow and develop with jobs and et cetera, has publicly stated that they have some concern about the land use proposition contained in the comprehensive plan, and supposedly put on hold their recommendations with comment back to staff and et cetera about that. is there anything that you can share with regard to how the comprehensive plan treat that? And I don't want to get into what their specific issues
Right.
are, but generally how the comprehensive plan treat the subject of development in Franklin County, and I think is more industrial development, which follows up on Jimmy's
Yeah.
question.
Well, and I think if we've all kind of kept up with KCDC's comments around the comp plan, it's predictable and makes sense because most of our existing industrial parks are either close to or pretty much entirely built out. There are some vacant industrial properties within the city, but most of them are small and not necessarily located in areas that would make sense, and that's probably why they haven't been heavily utilized. But that is a central question, as we've talked about the entire comp plan, is, okay, if we want future development, future industrial development, manufacturing development, we're going to have to set something aside. So, as I mentioned, we had not gotten the level of support that enabled us to push the advisory committee to keep that several hundred acres in southern Franklin County as a proposed industrial park. Now, whether that'll change when it gets to the Planning Commission or the legislative bodies, I don't know. We did include several hundred acres in and around the Twilight Trail area, some of which was already industrial in the existing future land use map, but we've added several hundred acres as well. My opinion is because of access issues, it's probably a little less ideal for potential future development, although it's much closer to access to actual sanitary sewer in the near future. Yeah, I mean, we're aware as their mission dictates, they would like to see much more, if not as much as possible, available land so that they can go source projects. I mean, what we've seen in the state of Kentucky the last few years are some like fast-acting, significant economic development projects happening that we just simply right now don't have the property available for, and we're missing out on. But that's both an economic development question and I think a personal question for all of us about what we want our community to look like. And maybe there are some of us that would prefer to miss out on those opportunities, but yeah, we need, that's one of the central questions I think we've wrestled with during this comp plan, because we find ourselves at that crossroads of, okay, we've, in a good way, great, our industrial park's developed. In a bad way, what now and where do you want to put it? And the tough part about that is you've got to find sewers and infrastructure, and you've got to find large tracts of land to develop, and that's going to put you in a place where chances are the neighbors are not going to be happy.
Nope.
And that's what we've kind of repeated to everybody, and when I've talked with, either elected or appointed officials, it's going to become a political question because you're going to have to be willing to stand there and say, no, we're doing it. In addition to whatever your planners suggest, it immediately, for the people that live right next to it, it's not going to be popular. I think we can all agree.
How well do I know that?
Yeah.
And then I'm going to change gears on you here. Within Frankfort city limits, etc., there have been a considerable amount of conversation around the availability and sufficiency of housing, both high-end and affordable housing, and access to that. Does the plan address that issue in some way, or can the average citizen who go and read the plan find a section in the plan that talks about affordable housing and how future development should accommodate that?
You'll see in multiple different places in the plans referencing to housing, diversity of housing, affordable housing, and our need for just housing volume generally. We reference, as some of you may know, we completed a housing study not long ago, help educate the comp plan process about what's needed, and not surprisingly, a lot of things are needed, both from an affordable perspective, but even all the way up to larger single-family homes. And so you'll notice as you read our residential land use designations, there's a lot of discussion about what we call gentle intensification, and that came from the recommendations of the housing study, including things like considering accessory dwelling units, or granny flats as they're called, talking about short-term rentals and how that has interacted with our housing supply. And considering in some of our more suburban single-family detached neighborhoods whether we should allow as a conditional or in places a mixture of housing types and perhaps duplexes and things like that to gently intensify and produce more units than we have until now. So that'll be part of another, as I said before, why it's so interesting to get to the actual zoning code rewrite, because the comp plan comes up with all these great ideas, but we actually are going to have the opportunity with an entire code rewrite to make an attempt to actually address them all, which I think is exciting.
And then let me ask one more question, and then I'll let someone else bug you. There has also been, quietly, a lot of conversation about the development of the property around the old Y, where the convention center used to be. I think it's the 11 acres that we talk about. Does the plan specifically address that area and arena in terms of future development and how it's to be used? Or are we looking at doing a special plan to deal with that, since it's in the middle of state government development?
Well, so as we worked through that entire process, before we even got to the comp plan, the city and county jointly funded a downtown master plan, which does very specifically have kind of a conceptual master plan for how that's to be developed. And then subsequently, in 2018, we wrote an urban mixed-use zoning designation, which is intentionally meant to hopefully be applied to that area so that we could regulate some mixed use similar to the historic downtown that surrounds it, but with some different architectural standards and things like that, so that it can, on one hand, fit in, but also be clearly depicted as new development rather than the historic. Since then, we've processed a zone change. They've gone to for the remaining private project elements. We've referenced that downtown master plan in the comp plan. So we go through, we had one of the first things you do when we start this is we get with the consultant team and we say, here are all the other plans, right? Here's the downtown master plan. Here's the riverfront development plan. Here's the parks master plan. And they start pouring through all those things. And then we reference those in places directly, but in other places you'll just hear content in the plan that clearly is a result of those other activities. And so certainly the future land use map for those properties reflects that initiative. And so we continue work on the transit center parking garage. It's supposed to be done midsummer. And you'll notice that the developer of parcels B and C has been working on demolition of the old Y, and then the connection of Washington Street should begin. And hopefully as we get done and get our people out of the way so that they can mobilize on parcel B, hopefully we'll be receiving and reviewing development plans for that parcel, which will be very exciting. It's been a long road on that whole project.
I don't envy your job.
I hear that often.
Do you know, like, what businesses or anything getting ready to open up in Frankfort, or anything coming? I know that First Watch restaurant.
First Watch, we just approved development plans. The West Banco location there at
Yeah.
Franklin Square.
Yeah.
We just approved development plans to demolish that and then put a Jaggers restaurant in the same location and next door between it and Qdoba, a new West Banco location.
Nice. Don't put it, what's it called?
Jaggers?
Jaggers.
I've not been to one. I think it's under like the Texas Roadhouse or Outback Steakhouse umbrella. It's like a burger joint.
So there's a plan to demolish the current West Bank?
West Banco in Franklin Square?
Yeah, but they're going to build a new location next door, but they're also building this restaurant.
Oh.
So just approved those. The first watch is going in.
Yeah,
I expect to get possibly another project on the other side from First Watch in that parking lot. That's one of the things that we've been really fortunate the last few years. You know, everybody focuses on things like Century Plaza and Eastwood Shopping Center that are only partially utilized and, you know, could look better. But in some of our other larger box shopping quarters, we've actually been very fortunate to see this redevelopment of, you know, whether it's the Kmart, and then putting the Chick-fil-A out in the parking lot where there's already impervious surface, and then the Daggers, First Watch, and West Banco, as well as when they divided up the old Elder Beerman into smaller units, much like they did Kmart, to keep it functional. So that's, I think, a very good thing, to keep those from just going empty, because, you know, that's a big problem when you have a big box leave. Is
how come you can't get anything down there at Century Plaza, you know?
be a better question for the property owners.
Oh. Yeah, same with these.
But I will say, as part of both the comp plan rewrite and the development code rewrite, we've had a lot of discussion about how to incentivize infill development, how to tear down barriers for infill development, because one of the reasons, I can say generically for properties like that, is that lots of times, both from a cost and time perspective, but also from a regulatory perspective, it's just harder and more expensive to do infill. As a general rule, a developer would much rather have, right, like a flat grass field to start with than, okay, I've got to demolish buildings. Oh, how do I make connections? Because right now our regulations, if somebody were going to intensely attempt to redevelop that property, we would probably have a whole series of waivers and modifications that would have to happen, which all take time, energy, and money, and inject uncertainty into the project. So what we're working towards very hard is that when we get to the development code rewrite, we can take down some of those barriers. We can describe what properties might qualify, and then try to enable the environment to make it more palatable. And then, you know, hopefully let the market do the rest of the work is the hope. So.
Have you been involved with the discussion concerning Home Street?
Yes. So we did the planning grant, and now we've received one to finish construction plans and do our first phase of Home Street, which is about 2/3 of the corridor. So that is beginning. I just had a meeting invite come in this morning for later in the week to begin talking with consultant team and stuff about that. It's very exciting.
What's that going to look like?
It'll be multiple street typicals, because as we all know from going down Home Street, it changes greatly between just the amount of right-of-way and the development style. But much like, you know, think in terms of the project scope, think about Second Street, only larger. And trying to both fix utility issues and challenges, but also pedestrian availability in the corridor, while we have very limited in some of those areas. You know, if you think about right as you come off High Street and start going down Holmes, the first 5-6 blocks, it gets real tight there. And there's even places where we have, you know, utility poles right in the middle of the sidewalk, very limited room for parking. So dealing with those issues while still trying to increase the pedestrian availability and safety, because we know a lot of the people in that corridor depend on it. But then you get to the middle section, where you have some more industrial uses, you know, after Meager, and the right-of-way is huge. We have large shoulders, plenty of room to get creative. So we were fortunate while we were doing the comp plan, literally the same team that we have for the comp plan were the consultants we had for the planning for Home Street. So we were able to have them do essentially some small area master plan work as part of that scope, which we could then include in the comp plan, so that they match. The future land use designation will look just like the master plan that was in the Home Street work to redevelop over time.
Do you ever foresee some kind of an arena facility again, that we can have our local graduations in instead of sending them out somewhere?
I see work happening and hopefully some success eventually in some type of convention and meeting center. I for one would be surprised with an arena. I would argue that's probably not the facility we need, but we do need something. To keep things like graduations here, but I think also because with state government and our other businesses here, the fact that we can't have more conventions and meeting space, I think is a huge loss for us. You know, that the idea that we'd have big official state government meetings that go out of town is maddening, right? Missed opportunity. So,
Are they talking about putting a civic center there where the farmer's market is?
there was talk about that at one time. The downtown master plan depicted the concept of a hotel parking garage convention center there potentially. At this time, I would say I don't think that's going to happen. But as some of you all may have read in the paper, the Capitol Plaza Hotel is in the process of hopefully changing hands and being reinvested in heavily. And then we'll be finishing the parking garage and transit center that's attached to it. So I, for one, would look for an opportunity potentially in that same location to who knows, between, I know the elected officials have had talks with trying to find state funds or other things to leverage with private investment to get a meeting facility that then someone could operate. And it makes the most sense for somebody operating a hotel to operate it. But obviously the public's probably going to have to in some ways subsidize that process.
Are they gonna take the farmer's market and put it down on Home Street somewhere? Oh, that's what Tom just did.
There have been conversations. Right now, I don't think any decisions have been made. The farmer's market is there. I think they're safe for the moment.
Will the Home Street corridor, will it eventually, and we use the terms affordable housing, will the property down on Home Street eventually become unaffordable? As a lot of places, when you develop and put in a new corridor, it seems, I guess the term is gentrification. Will it eventually be just completely turned over into high end?
We hope not. I mean, that's not the goal. And we've talked a lot as we've done that project and had the consultant team meet with the residents down there about, the need for affordable housing. We need more of it, not to take it away. So hopefully we'll just see continued reinvestment in the existing properties for those folks that are renting already. It's heavily renter occupied. And we've seen just over the last few years a bit of an increase in folks coming in and buying properties and investing in them. Some remain rentals, others have gone to short-term rentals, which can be concerning. So, and you may have seen recently the city now has started an affordable housing committee to specifically look at these things and look at the development and what role we may need to get more active in playing. I sit on that committee with the city manager, assistant city manager, and 2 city commissioners. And we've already had conversations with the director of Lexington's Office of Housing Affordability. They have a large pot of money and are doing some pretty exciting things there. Of course, Lexington has probably even worse challenges for affordable housing than we do. But we're starting to look at what other places like that are doing and how we can model that and what properties we either already own or might be able to get a hold of. I think, talking about Home Street, one of the big opportunities is the school system owns that very large undeveloped tract right sort of in the middle of the corridor. And so you'll see if you pull up any of the Home Street information or the comp plan that we show that as kind of a Home Street city center. And then as you move onto that property, we're showing like some more intense multifamily residential uses there in hopes that somebody might be able to get the property and invest in that as we invest in the corridor and create additional housing.
We have a little gift for you. We've got the Optimist Club, and then we're getting ready to do our Optimist Creed, and there's a copy of it. It's wonderful.
Thanks.
Thank you.